Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. I've got a really fantastic guest, really niching down, talking about brand, how to build a brand. His name is Stæven Frey, and he's got a really unique approach, and I'm gonna let him talk about it because he can talk about it better in his own words. So, Stæven, welcome.
Thanks, Christopher, for having me, and thanks, listeners, for joining us today on the Financial Freedom Podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, I know we were backstage, and what's interesting is you have a lot of interesting words. You have your adorkable brand scientist next door, ready to help your brand be a success. You also talk about some interesting concepts. So kind of expand upon that and how you got started and what you do for clients.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I describe myself or I'm on stage or introduce, I say that I'm the adorkable founder and chief brand scientist at Quantum Branding. And I say that because there's something about science that just is really fun and evokes just this explorative wonder. And adorkable is the best word to describe that for me. And what hanging out with me is like, it's geeky and nerdy, but it's also fun and cute all at the same time. There may be an orange cat that hovers around me on this call. I don't know. So if you like cats and you like the color orange and you like science, hang out with me. And so, yeah, I help brands become authentic and memorable category leaders through the power of brand science. And that is what I've identified is the core of what helps fuel a successful brand's growth, sales, and marketing. And so I really love to help explain that through lighthearted and articulate insights and make it easy to understand how branding is the most important aspect of every brand's existence. So hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that today. And you, the listeners, can walk away with some actionable steps to find out how you can get help with right where you are and move yourself forward faster. So that's, I think, what we're going to be talking about today. I don't know.
Yeah. So you've coined the term brand science as the core of successful branding and kind of elaborate on what brand science is and how it differentiates from traditional approaches.
Sure. So most people are familiar with the terms marketing. They're familiar with the terms branding. What I'd like to do is I'd like to take a very functional approach and say, what is marketing? And if we look at marketing that says, don't remove the technology or the modality for a second, what is it doing? And it's literally doing, hey, do business with me. That's really what marketing is doing. So any of the marketing that you're doing, and then advertising, it's just marketing that's paid. You paid for someone else to do that for you. So you're paying someone else to say, hey, do business with them. So marketing is, hey, do business with me. And then branding are the distinctive elements that we experience from a sensory perspective: sight, sound, touch, feel, story, word, shape, color, music. There's several categories, but how we make memories is based on our senses. Literally, our brain is trying to make sense of the world around us. And we've even learned that some people are wired differently and they're neurodiverse. And so they may even experience them differently. But regardless, everybody is making sense of the world around them and making memories based on their experiences from their senses. So if we integrate those memories, how do we do that? With branding. So branding is the set of mnemonic or memory devices that we are creating within their category and for their brand to help make people think of you and your brand first.
Yeah, I love that. And it's all what I love it's science. So, there's tried and true principles. There's a great book by Robert Cialdini called Influence, which kind of you can study brands and marketing and messages, and you can see each one of those components in their messaging. The next question is branding myths and conceptions, and what are some of the most common myths or conceptions about branding and marketing that businesses fall prey to, and how does your approach help in dispelling these myths?
Absolutely. So most times when we are starting our business, we say, I need a brand. And then you're like, well, I'm going to create a brand. And here's the thing. It's not about who created it. It could be your nephew, it could be someone from church, it could be someone on Fiverr, it could be an agency, but there's typically this initial creation stage. And that's great. That's great. I'm so proud of you for having a brand and going through at least those first steps. That's really, really important. What BrandScience does and says, you know what? That's great. And we want to continue to create memories. And here's the common misconception. Most people think their brand is the logo, or their brand is most of the work is done by the logo. Like if people see my logo, they're going to know who I am. And that may be true, but here's the interesting thing. When you look at Fortune 500 brands, such as Coca-Cola, they have over 150 sensory brand assets of word, shape, color, story, sound, music, and character. They've got always Coca-Cola. They've got the shape of the bottle. They have the swooshy, of the brand mark itself. They have the motion graphics of how that unravels. They even have the polar bears and Santa Claus at Christmas. I think they even introduced a penguin. And then you have the archetype of the stories they're using, of the everyman, every day. They have the use of iconography that they're using, the color palettes of the products. At the end of the day, they have over 150 and counting. And if you wanted to go start a Coca-Cola brand or a cola brand, you would have a very difficult time competing. You'd have to start on a local level first to get validation, distribution. But here's the thing. It's not just about creating a cola company. Any company cannot compete with Fortune 500 BrandScience when it comes down to the sensory assets. So you may have a brand mark, your brand, the name. So you've got the brand mark, your name itself, and then maybe a color you use. If your competitor or other folks in your industries who you may not even feel like are your competitors, if they have 10 to 15 sensory assets, maybe they have a color palette, maybe they have a really distinctive set of typefaces they use. Maybe they also have a tagline. And when we start to add these up, we find that this distinctive brand asset palette, it's just like Bob Ross. Like, you have a palette, like those little like circly shapes with paints on them. It's just like that. And every time you create a campaign or a new thing, you want to grab, here's our color. Here's our brand mark. Here's our photography. And these are assets that are distinct to you. If you only have 3 of them, you're going to have a really hard time getting traction in your industry. And here's why. Because the number one way to be top of mind in people's minds and to have mental availability is by having distinctive brand assets. So you may have done that a long time ago, but if you're not actively investing in creating more and refining those ones constantly and consistently, your brand's going to be dull, it's going to be forgotten, and you simply just don't have, it's almost like not having enough gas to go up a hill, or enough traction to go up a hill. You need enough traction to propel your brand in the mind of people every day. And so BrandScience teaches us about distinctive brand assets. It also teaches us about how to even create the optimized message structure for campaigns. So it gives us a way to cut through the fluff, make our marketing simpler, and make sure that we're top of mind with the right tools.
Yeah. And what's interesting is when you were describing Coca-Cola, you can hear when you think of the brand Coca-Cola or like brand Starbucks, like McDonald's, you get this sensory feeling. It's kind of like when you're asked to recall it, it's like, it's like these yeah. And like talking about brand impact measurement, how can businesses effectively measure the impact of their branding efforts, and what metrics or indicators that are central to your methodology? Because, like smell and taste and touch, how do you quantify that?
Sure. So what we find is like some of the assets, some of the things, like when it gets into the product, that's going to connect with experiential qualitative things. Like people are going to review your product. Oh, this is the orange creamsicleiest flavored candy I've ever had in my life. 5 stars. It's great. So you're going to get some of those qualitative feedback, which is important to create a feedback loop for the customer experience. But when we're talking about launching your brand, we have to go back to exactly how are we doing that and how are we creating those memories? Because we don't want to actually get into just yet the experience. Like we need to think that out. But initially, we need to have the assets because that's what they're going to utilize before they purchase. So they're going to have heard of you. A friend of you is yours is going to tell you about it. You're going to see an ad online. You're going to get coupons sent in the mail. If you hear about Chobani yogurt, Chobani yogurt, Chobani yogurt, you see commercials on TV, there's ads, it's following you on Facebook, and then you get to the grocery store, there's no Chobani yogurt, they have failed. So mental availability and physical availability are the two best friends in brand science. And
Yeah.
so mostly what I'm not getting into distribution, although that's a valid part of metrics. Over here, we're looking at your brand assets. And so I actually have a tool, and this is the same tool that Mars Petcare, Coca-Cola, Walmart, Target, Michaels, any large brand that's using Fortune 500 brand science, they're using the same methodology of counting their brand assets. They're looking at how many assets. And so I have a tool, it's called the BrandScience Checklist. And you can check it out. It's bit.ly BrandScience Checklist. It'll be in the show notes too. But this is really the starting point. You want to see how many do you have? How many are you starting with? And at the end of the day, your brand should have at least 15 to 25 to start. And in that checklist, we'll walk through and say, like, okay, do you have a brand mark? Do you have a colorized version of that brand mark? Do you have a color palette? Do you have specific colorized colors that you use for your products that would be, noticeable? Do you have typefaces? And so when we're working through this checklist, we're going through each category, and basically you want 2 or 3 here, 2 or 3 here, 2 or 3 here. And the goal is then we identify which one of these are worth investing in. And we need to ask ourselves, when people see this color, does it remind them of a category? So when you see Pepto-Bismol pink, does it remind you of Pepto-Bismol, or does it remind you, oh, no, that's Barbie pink? So sometimes there's a color that may be used in multiple categories, but if customers see it in your category, they understand what it is. We know that yellow may mean lemon if we're talking about fruit flavors, but we know that yellow may mean stained teeth if we're talking about the dental industry. So color theory is not universal. It's cultural and it's contextual. And the goal is to first sit down and count how many assets we have, and then ask ourselves, do these make us think of a category? Do these make us think of our competitor? And can I uniquely use them and people associate them with me? And that's the first starting point, is doing the brand assets checklist and asking those 3 questions about the category, the competitor, and if they are distinct to me. And the goal is for you to have the most famous and distinct assets that represent you. So that way you truly are distinct and people remember you.
Yeah, I love that. Kind of round it out with just kind of some success stories, brand science in action, and how can people find you and follow you?
Absolutely. So we're going to put some links in the show notes. I have a link tree that you can click on, and you can check out the brand science checklist as well as find out more about the Brandpreneur program. That's a 10-week program to help you understand the foundations of brand science and walk away with a brand plan. So you may be feeling stuck and worried that you don't know how to implement some of these things on your own. And so when you're going to service providers, you don't know what to ask for. This is going to get rid of that and help you understand how to move confidently in your brand's future. And to round this out with a success story, whenever I work with brands, what's interesting is the brand science is the same. I've worked with over 150 major brands in 65 different categories. And what's always the same is people. And people always have minds, and those minds, for the most part, work the same. And so there was an author, and she was also she just finished her PhD. She was doing some speaking. She was the leading practitioner in her field. And so one of the things we did is came up with a brand identity that was distinct within her category, but yet felt native. Like if you're in the cookie aisle, you've got to be a cookie. You can't be a chip or a cracker, a cake or pie. You got to be a cookie. And so using some of the shared memory structures, we helped create a brand identity for her that felt intuitive, felt like she was, a senior level expert in her field. And it's what she used to help propel her coaching, her leading psychology program for practitioners, as well as be the framework for her book and for her events that she's creating too. And so all of that started with her saying, I want people, when they see my brand, to intuitively understand how I provide what I do, who I am, what I do, and why it matters. And so using the science of how brands actually work, we're helped her able to create that brand to help her get not just traction, but success in her field.
Okay. And for all the audience out there, let's thank Stæven for coming on and talking about brand science, and follow him on all of his social media links. Those will be in the show notes. And with that, thanks so much for coming on to the podcast.